Hey, what's up YouTube? Lightsaber Samurai here, and I'm back again for another video. Now that Sega Genesis Mini is dropping today, and it's got a lot of people understandably hyped up about it. I mean, it's going back, and it's reaching back and bringing our childhoods back to the forefront almost 30 years later. So, why am I not that excited about it? Well, it's because I already have a Sega Genesis Mini, and it's the one that everybody crapped on about a year and a half ago. That, of course, is the Atgames, as I hold it backwards, the Atgames Sega Genesis Flashback. And while it's not a perfect machine, I wanted to take this time to talk about 3 things that it does better than the Sega Genesis Mini. So, Atgames Sega Genesis Flashback, let's talk about it. Okay, so I know what you guys are all saying. We went over the specs a year ago. I actually did a video on this when I compared it to the Super NES Classic, and I'll leave a link in the description below, and you can go by and check that out. But like I said, despite its shortcomings, there are 3 glaring things and glaring advantages that the Atgames, the beautiful Atgames trash, has over the official Sega Genesis Mini. So let's get into them here, and I'm going to start by putting the console up. Like I said, it's actually a little bit bigger than the Sega Genesis Mini, and it was quite a bit bigger than the SNES Classic. But like I said, I like its form factor, and I like the attention to detail minus the little Atgames logo on there. That's where they would have like the high def. Actually, Sega Genesis would be down here. They would have the high definition gaming on the top. Quick intermission here. Here's my newest cat here. This is Kami. Kami, say hello. It's short for kamikaze because he destroys everything in the house. But anyway, I just threw him on the couch. It's cool. But like I said, let's start with, let's see, like I said, 3 glaring things. First, you know what? Let's start with the game selection, because the game selection worth a mention. So the Sega Genesis Flashback has 42 games, and you've seen the list. You can go and check out the list. Actually, the list of games is actually really good. A lot of, you know, the no-dub titles, the Sonics are in there. There's a Street Fighter game in there, and a lot of actually titles that a lot of people didn't really get a chance to play. One game that I'm excited for is Alicia Dragoon. I saw GameSat cover that game about 3 years ago, and like I said, I've wanted to play it ever since. Alicia Dragoon looks like an awesome little action platformer game, and one thing that they added was the Wily Wars, and that is the Sega Genesis remaster of Mega Man 1, 2, and 3. So basically in that right there, you get 3 games for the price of 1. So like I said, the collection is quite strong, but where they come up short, Atgames fills the void primarily when it comes to licenses. And like I said, the Atgames offering actually has a strong library in itself. It boasts 45 Genesis games, not to mention it has a handful of Master System and Game Gear games. Like I said, it does come with 20 of those random like arcade games, but nobody cares, nobody's playing those anyway. That brings the total count to 85, but as far as just the Genesis, like the Sega content, you're getting 65 games there. So right there, the library is already bigger than what you're getting with the Sega Genesis Flashback. But like I said, going back to licenses like Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, that was huge on the Genesis because the blood code. Like I said, if you guys remember that back in the day, Nintendo and Sega was going head to head on the ports. Actually, Nintendo had the better version of Street Fighter 2, and so Sega came back and they dropped the Mortal Kombat games, but they left in the blood, whereas Nintendo replaced it with this awkward looking gray sweat. So I believe they kept in the fatalities as well in the Sega Genesis version, and I can't remember, either Nintendo took them out or they censored and dumbed them down. So one of the two happened, but the superior versions were definitely on the Genesis. And like I said, it's got a nice little selection of some of the licensed games there that Sega couldn't bother with getting. I understand a lot of that, especially like the Aladdins and Lion King and stuff like that, like a lot of the Marvel beat 'em ups and stuff. That would be a pain in the butt to you know, to get the licensing for and all that. So it's not really a strike against Sega, but it was just an interesting thing that I thought, oh, well, that's cool. Some Atgames had that Sega didn't. So that's number one. Okay, number two here, and we got to take a look. It's the controllers. Now, the Sega Genesis Classic comes with a replicated version of their classic 3-button controller, and that right off the bat is kind of a problem to me, because the 3-button controller, while it was decent for some, like I said, personally I never really liked the 3-button controller. The 6-button controller was awesome, and in fact a lot of their games on the lineup, like the aforementioned Street Fighter 2, like I said, that plays best with the 6-button controller. Now, I suspect the reason they added the 3-button controller in their packaging is because they've got a partnership with Hyperkin, and Hyperkin is releasing a 6-button variant to go with the Sega Genesis Classic. So as to not cut into Hyperkin sales, I think that's why they did it. But with the Atgames offering, you had a wireless 6-button controller, and they work great. I mean, they feel good in the hand. And like I said, a lot of nitpickers would say, you know, they were getting things like lag. I didn't notice anything like lag or anything like that. The buttons still feel good a year on, and I do play this relatively often, as I don't own a Sega Genesis, so I get my Genesis fixed by using this machine, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But like I said, this came with I thought a fantastic controller, and not to mention that, but Atgames was awesome enough to add the 9-pin controller ports on the front. And what that means is that you can use original Sega Genesis hardware. You can use your 3-button controller. You can use the Sega Genesis 6-button controller if you prefer. You can even use your Atari joystick, as they have the same connector. And like I said, you can plug those directly into the machine and use the original hardware. And I thought that was a huge plus in giving us that choice between using the wireless 6-button controllers, or if you have your own 6-button or 3-button controllers, you can plug those right into the console. They play fine. Again, I don't notice anything like lag. So like I said, that's another big advantage that the Atgames console has over the Sega Genesis Mini. And going into the final advantage that this has over the Sega Genesis Mini, and it's right on the top. Now, the Sega Genesis Mini did add moving flaps on the top to just kind of symbolize, you know, the good old days, and it was a nice attention to detail. But Atgames also had that same attention to detail with one important caveat. You can actually put games in this bad boy, and that's one thing that I actually left out of my review a year ago. So let's talk about it here. It has, you know, the working port, which is awesome, because like I said, there's a lot of games that I own that I can't play on this because they're not included. But like I said, if I wanted to play, I don't know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Hyperstone Heist, for instance, I can just pop in my cartridge. I can pop in Toy Story. I can pop in The Lion King. I can pop in Jurassic Park and a lot of the other Genesis games that I enjoyed to play back in the day, and then games that I'm just being introduced to. I got Rocket Knight Adventures. I can pop Rocket Knight Adventures in here, and so I think that really opens up the machine. Time will tell, you know, in the coming weeks and months, as far as what hackers do to open up the Sega Genesis Mini. I know this one is in particular hard to modify and add the Genesis library to, so time will tell if you can do it with the Sega Genesis Mini. I suspect that you'll be able to, but if for some reason you can't, like I said, again, this holds a huge advantage in the fact that you can play actual hardware right on the console. Like I said, the Atgames offering, for all the hate that it got when it was compared to the Super Nintendo Classic, like I said in that video a year ago, I mean, it's important to note that we are comparing this Atgames device to the Super Nintendo Classic. That in itself is a win, because the Super Nintendo Classic was awesome. It was perfectly emulated. There was great attention to detail. And like I said, there are a lot of things about this machine that I like better than the SNES Classic. And like I said, we just went over the 3 that I like for the Sega Genesis Classic. So that's pretty much gonna do it for this episode. If you like this content, Please give me a like and subscribe and hit that bell notification. Questions, comments, concerns, threats down below. What do you guys think about the Atgames offering, and will you be picking up the Sega Genesis Mini? And feel free to flame me in the comments. Like I said, this is just, I'm not saying necessarily that this device is better than the Sega Genesis Mini. It was just an observation that I made that, you know, there are 3 things that I felt like this had that the Sega Genesis Mini didn't have. So that's all I got for you. Again, please hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to get to 500 by the end of the fall, which is basically right now, and I'm trying to get to 1,000 for the end of the year. But that's all I got for you. I'm Lightsaber Samurai. Peace.